you hear this stuff and you're like, these guys couldn't have actually been that good. Nobody can do that on a banjo. That's not possible. And then, you come around to it and it's like, you know what? They just didn't do anything else. They didn't check their email. They didn't go driving for 8 hours to get to a gig. They just practiced all the time.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Keith Billik. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast. If any of you are first-time listeners, thanks a lot for tracking me down. This is a place where we laugh together, we cry together, and we learn a lot about banjos and banjo players. It's a lot of fun, and I hope you like it. For those of you returning, it's great to see you all again. Special thanks to this episode's Patreon sponsor. It is Wayne Bartlett, and a lot of you, if you're on Instagram or Twitter, you may follow a user named Top Hat Banjo. That is Wayne's alter ego in the Twitter sphere. Is that a word? I feel like I've heard that before. So I went to check out Wayne's page, and true to form, there he is, looking great in his top hat, holding his banjo. So I guess that just leaves me with the conclusion that us banjo players, we are straight shooters, honest, good people. You go to Top Hat Banjo's page, you see a top hat and you see a banjo. You go to my page, at Banjo Podcast on Twitter, you get posts about a banjo podcast. So if anyone gets a chance, go check out he posts some videos and some practice tips on there that I think you'll like. And Wayne, thank you so much for supporting the podcast. I encourage all the rest of you, if you enjoy listening to these episodes, please check out the Patreon page. It's patreon.com/banjopodcast, and you can figure out how to be a supporter yourself of one of these episodes. You can also support the podcast by subscribing and rating on whatever podcast platform you use. 5 stars, of course, by the way. And that helps me out a lot. You can spread the word about it on social media, share links. Drop me a line, too, if you have any comments, questions, suggestions, recipe ideas, whatever. I like hearing from all of you. That's pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com for those of you who want to email the show. Today's episode features Aaron Jonah Lewis. You may have heard the relatively short bonus episode that I put out a few days ago, so I won't spend too much time introducing Aaron, but he's a good friend of mine. He lives here in Detroit. Although you wouldn't really realize it, he's on the road a lot. He travels the world playing fiddle, banjo, guitar, singing with all sorts of different groups, and you'll hear him talk about that. I mentioned in the previous episode, but he's truly one of the most talented musicians that I know on a number of different instruments. He's a multiple contest winning player on both banjo and fiddle. He has a very amazing beard. You should check out photos of the beard. He has 3 first names, so just quite a specimen of a guy, and he's a really nice dude and enthusiastic about music to boot. So I was really happy to have him on the show. Like I said, he travels the world a lot. He actually, this is vintage Aaron. For anyone who knows him, you'll agree with this. He traveled to the Yukon Territory for a show just a few weeks ago, so that's early February, folks, in a van that did not have working heat. So, yeah, of course he did that. But he really loves playing music for people, so that's what he's going to do. This is a very educational episode, folks. It's not the typical bluegrass demonstration. He's going to play everything from Swedish waltzes to classic banjo, and I think you'll get a really good feel for the breadth of his musical knowledge with this. Anyway, I know you'll enjoy hearing all those things that he has to offer. Here he is, Aaron Jonah Lewis.
When I got into the banjo, which is pretty much as soon as I could get my hands on a banjo, which happened as soon as I saw someone playing a banjo, I started out with bluegrass and Scruggs style, and I was practiced that a lot for a while and played it a fair bit and still do. And then pretty soon after that, about a year after that, I got into playing clawhammer, and I still do that. And it's just more and more fun to do different things. But
yeah,
I only got into playing classic banjo a couple years ago, pretty much two years ago, and it really hit hard when that bug infected me. So yeah, I'm really hooked on it.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I'm aware of what classic banjo is. I've heard it before, but I don't know a ton about it. So assuming that maybe a lot of the listeners also are relatively unfamiliar with what classic banjo even sounds like, are you able to give us a quick demonstration that'll at least give context to a lot of these other things that you might be talking about?
Oh yeah, absolutely. How about I'll just play a little bit?
Yeah, perfect. What piece is this? Introduce it.
This is a piece that I'm so proud of because it took me a really long time to get it under my fingers. It's called the Ragtime Oriole, and it's a ragtime piece written by James Scott. And it was played on the banjo. It wasn't written for the banjo, but it was played on the banjo by Fred Van Epps.
Okay. Yeah, let's hear it.
It goes a little something like this. Oh man,
that was excellent.
Yeah, so that's kind of a, I guess, a later period. So that's from the 1920s, and
I already have so many questions. Like, so you said that was not written for the banjo. What was that written for? A piano?
I believe it was written for piano. I've also heard sort of ragtime orchestra arrangements.
Okay. So that's more or less an adaptation of maybe a horn section or something like that. Could be.
I think it's piano. Really, it's like mostly the right hand, the melody of the piano, and then on the recording that I got it from, there's a piano playing along as well. So,
is that pretty typical, or was there not a lot of music written for the banjo, and most classic banjo repertoire is that transposed, or is there quite a catalog of banjo pieces?
Well, there's a lot of stuff that was written for the banjo. It's so cool. This is kind of like the forgotten history, a part of the forgotten history of the banjo. This was part of what got me so excited about it because I love bluegrass and I love playing it, and I got really into that at first, and I didn't really think about what came before because it's just so awesome. And then, then I got into clawhammer and old time and stuff. I'm like, oh, that's older than bluegrass. That's interesting. But what really kind of led to bluegrass technique and Scruggs style and like the finger picking was this style of banjo playing, classic style, also called early finger style. So not to confuse it with bluegrass. But yeah, there were a bunch of different composers writing specifically for banjo, whether it was solo banjo or banjo and piano, banjo and second banjo, banjo quartets, banjo orchestras. And, around the turn of the century, the 20th century, that is, the banjo was the most popular instrument in the U.S. It was super, like, you've probably seen pictures of those, little clubs of banjo players all in their tuxedos and
they
stuff.
Still exist in certain places, yeah.
Oh, I think that's wonderful. But yeah, it can't really be understated, like, the popularity of the banjo in that time period. It was like the electric guitar in the 70s through 80s, 90s, pretty much till recently.
And it seems funny given a lot of the stereotypes and generalizations that exist now about banjo, but it was actually kind of more of an upper class society type of thing to see was this. These sophisticated banjo players. So
yeah, that's another real interesting thing. I mean, I got into all the history stuff because of the music that, I kind of, that's what led to it for me. So I'm still learning a lot, but what I understand is that the classic banjo players were coming out of the minstrel tradition. That's what was going on before fingerstyle was really popular. And that's, of course, really important thing to know about, which I didn't know about sooner and wish I had. But basically, the minstrel shows form the basis of all of our popular culture, all of our popular entertainment.
Wow, okay.
And that consisted of a lot of different elements, but essentially it was white guys painting their faces black and making fun of black people.
Yeah, some uncomfortable things to learn about.
Absolutely. That's probably why I didn't learn about it sooner, because people don't want to talk about it. But that's a big part of the history of the banjo, is that it was originally, it came from Africa. The people who were, kidnapped and sold as slaves, they didn't bring banjos with them, but they brought the idea of the banjo with them, and they made banjos and played them. And so it was associated with slaves and with plantations, and so that was used in minstrel shows as part of the comedy, to show like
to
plantation
kind of caricature this history of the instrument. Yeah,
exactly, as a part of a kind of a clown instrument and kind of a joke. And from what I understand, like the professional musicians who were playing the banjos, they got better and better at it, and they wanted to play better and better music on it. And over time, they got influenced by other styles, such as Spanish guitar playing, like classical guitar playing. And that's where the up-picking comes from.
Really? Okay.
So the older style, the minstrel style, is more like clawhammer, which I can't really demonstrate, but, it was, I think, a little more nuanced and fancy, like different time signatures would be involved. There'd be jigs and there'd be mazurkas and all kinds of different things, but kind of evolved into this finger style, which paved the way for more sophisticated music, more complicated stuff, and also allowed musicians to depart the minstrel stage for the first time and just play the banjo on a concert stage without blackface, without crazy costumes, without comedy bits and dance routines.
And have it be more accepted as its own separate art form.
Yeah, and so at the same time as that's happening, banjo manufacturers are finding ways to make lots of banjos for cheap, and they want to market them to people who can afford them, because traditionally banjos were always made by the banjo maker, by the banjo player, sorry.
Okay.
I don't know if they were marketed to the middle class and the upper class out of this American greed kind of thing, that's so typical. Or if it was more like people were playing this music, audiences were excited about it, and it became more in demand, and maybe both of those things happen at the same time.
Yeah, could be.
I do know, just to kind of talk about upper class and royalty and stuff, the Virginia Minstrels, I think they were the first kind of touring minstrel group who actually went overseas to England.
What year would we be talking about here?
This is sometime in 1830s or 40s.
Oh, wow.
And they were so well loved by the royal court in England that they thought they were going to stay for a little while. They stayed for years. and one of the royal family, I think it was the Prince of Wales, who became King Edward VII, played the banjo, and he took banjo lessons. And that's kind of
from one of the performers, from one of the, what did you say, Virginia?
The Virginia Minstrels. Yeah, okay. I'm not sure if it was from one of those guys or from someone else, but it, when the king is doing it, everybody wants to do it. It's like he set the tone.
Yeah, very cool.
So yeah, banjo took off in England as well as in the U.S. and that minstrel phenomenon was the first sort of cultural thing that influenced other countries, that like made its way outside of the U.S.
Very interesting.
And yeah, like I said, it's like it set the foundations for vaudeville and for Broadway and for what we have now, music videos and all of the kind of mainstream popular entertainment. Like you can easily trace it back. You can see the same elements. And I'm not an expert, but it is really fascinating. I've got a whole shelf of books that I haven't read yet.
Yeah, there's tons to learn about it. So going back to what you said about the playing style and how it was adapted, let's explain exactly for people what you were even doing performing that piece. You're playing it in a finger style, but you're not wearing picks.
Right.
Why don't you go through kind of what the typical approach is for this kind of music?
All right, yeah. So bare fingers, and my banjo does have a resonator, but they didn't really start putting resonators on these banjos until later on. I mean, 20s maybe at the soonest. This banjo was made in the 1950s, which goes to show that people were still buying them, or making them anyway. So
yeah,
for this kind of style of playing. But yeah, it's set up with nylon strings, which originally would have been gut, but nylon, everyone agrees, is superior. They sound better and last longer, and they're cheaper. Except the fourth string, which is like it's a classical guitar, a wound,
metal wound,
silver wound, nylon
core.
So,
okay.
And the standard tuning is just like open G, like you do in Bluegrass, except the fourth string's tuned down to C. So that's
like a home sweet home tuning for Scruggs people. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like what they call standard tuning. Now, if you tune up to what we call G, Bluegrass G, that would be called raised bass tuning. And there were a few other tunings that got used, but for the most part, everything's most everything's in that standard tuning, that what became plectrum tuning. And what else? Like the bridge that I've got on here is really light. It doesn't have 3 feet. It's only got 2, and it's really thin.
Huh.
I think it's maple. And when you use nylon strings, you don't need as much support. You have a lot less pressure going into the bridge, so you can cut down on your mass and get more sound that way, because steel strings will give you more sound in general, but
just not generating as much energy to transmit through the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So nylon strings, bare fingers, no picks.
Bare fingers, and I'm using 3 fingers like you would in Bluegrass. Occasionally, in the music that I've gone through, they will call for the ring finger, just occasionally.
Okay.
That's interesting. There's a lot of techniques.
Is that more to execute a melodic line or like a chord cluster?
There's just one. The most recent thing I saw was just doing an arpeggio. Like that.
Okay.
And sometimes it is for a chord cluster kind of thing. I'm trying to think of an example of that, but and there's ways around it too. If you really don't want to, like, sometimes if you're playing 4 strings to play a chord, like what I've learned is the common thing, the traditional way of doing that is to glide the thumb over the the top two strings, and then up with the other two.
Got it.
And that's one example of many just really different techniques that I've learned with the right hand. Like, with bluegrass, you've got rolls. That's the basis for it. It's not like it's dumb or like doesn't take any thinking, but there are these like clusters of notes that you can kind of fall into, and you got patterns that just sound great. Yeah. And with this stuff, every bar of music is a new set of skills you have to learn. So that one I thought I'd mention is, to me, like especially wacky, and it's taken a lot of practice to get halfway good at it. Yeah. Which is that finger glide, and it goes down with the thumb a lot, like or that's thumb index.
Yeah, you're hitting two consecutive notes on different strings with both with the thumb.
And then that also goes the other way, like with the index or the middle. Like it happens a lot on this one piece. This is actually the oldest one I know. It's called Weston's Great Minor Jig. It's by Horace Weston, who's an African-American banjo composer, banjo player. He was very famous in his day. S.S. Stewart actually wrote about him a lot. He was sort of used in Stewart's advertisements and things like that. Sort of a poster child for Stewart banjos.
Okay.
So I'll play a little bit of that.
And what is it that you're demonstrating here?
The finger glide is what I call it. Is when you're going to play two strings that are next to each other with one finger. Okay. Not right away. That's another thing that's connected, like doing a chord, but as part of a melody. Yeah. So let me see here. I'll get to the part I'm talking about, and then I'll stop and talk about some more stuff. There's one right there. Okay, that's not so dramatic, but it's like, what? That's weird. I got to get the hang of that. Yeah. I do it again there. Index, thumb, index. It's just so counterintuitive.
Now, would it be impossible to play otherwise, or how did you know to do that? Is the music notation such that it's... a lot of you're reading that?
Yeah, a lot of the music does tell you which fingers to use. In this case, it doesn't tell you. And I learned it all without doing the finger glide at first. And I was like, this is so weird and awkward because I'm jumping around. I'm going from a low string to a high string, like from the second string to the third to the fourth string, going thumb, index, thumb, or something like that. And that's like, okay, I'm making it work. I'm just practicing it and I'm making it work. I think probably someone told me, like, a lot of the time people would do this, slide the finger
a sweep
across.
Picking pattern.
Yeah, so like, let's see, another section of this tune would be... There it is. It's index, thumb, thumb. And then, because then you have these patterns that are like over 4 strings, but you only have 3 fingers.
Patterns where...
And then you get to the last section, it goes... So that's hardcore, going, thumb on the 3rd string, middle on the 1st string, and then index on the 2nd string and the 3rd string. Then thumb. And that's just repeating.
Yeah, and especially getting it at a precise rhythm.
Yeah.
Has got to be a whole nother challenge, even beyond the mechanics of it.
Yeah,
Playing it steady.
I mean, to me, like, I never mastered bluegrass banjo. I never became super great at it. But anyway, I was like, well, I'm just going to go ahead and do something that's a lot harder anyways, just kind of like, because playing rolls really well, if you can play rolls really well, it's not going to make you a master bluegrass banjo player, but it's going to get you far enough that you can probably jam with people and have a good time.
Right.
It's cool. This music, rolls is like such a... It's an important thing that comes up in pieces, but it's not the entirety. It's like you have to do so many other things. There's a lot of single string work. There's a lot of chord kind of action. There's a lot of left hand jumping around a lot. I'm not saying this to scare anyone away from it. I'm trying to say, like, this is super fun because it's like if you like musical challenges and you like puzzle solving, like,
Right.
that's what this is. It's like you look at this and you're like, how am I ever going to do this?
Have you found that playing in this style helps when you go back to bluegrass playing? Does it give you different ideas to try or a different approach? Or are you able to kind of separate those two things in your brain? And
No, for sure they're connected. Yeah, I mean, it's just right hand. I mean, whether I have picks on or not, it doesn't really change a lot for me personally. And I know some people play classic banjo music on a bluegrass banjo with picks, and you can do whatever you want. You know? It's like, there's no rules. You don't have to get some old authentic instrument and put special strings on it. I mean, if you want to go that route, I mean, I kind of got excited about it just because it's like something different. I don't know. I really like the sound and the feeling of the bare fingers on the nylon strings. It's like,
it's a very cool sound.
It's a different kind of control. You have like, I feel like you have a lot of dynamic control and like this connection to the tone that's really nice.
You can get a lot of those more stately kind of syncopations that you need for that music, but it gives it a different feel that you wouldn't really be able to get on a bluegrass instrument, really.
Yeah.
So you kind of started to go into it and we got sidetracked, but why don't we go back to how you even got into banjo in the first place? You said you were into it as soon as you saw it. When and where and how did that happen?
So I really have to mention Ben Belcher here because he's the guy he's the first banjo player that I got to kind of hang out with and watch him play. And he gave me his old banjo. And, I met him through another friend who we started a band together in Virginia. And that was in like 2001 or 2 or something. Mm-hmm. And Ben and I are still playing together. He's the person that I've been playing with longer than anyone else that I still play with. And he was just learning too, but he's really fast at learning. And he's just got great musical instincts, and I love playing with him. He's just a really good friend too.
And he does a lot of different things, but he is primarily what you'd call a bluegrass player. He wears the picks and the rolls. And
I think I might say like he and I both are like musicians who know enough about bluegrass to say, well, I don't really play bluegrass. But as far as the rest of the world is concerned, we play bluegrass.
That's what they would say about it. Yeah.
Yeah. But he can play straight ahead bluegrass and have it sound great. It's not necessarily what he always does or like what he would first think of doing necessarily. It depends who he's with, just like anyone, your style's going to change depending who you're with. But his style that he plays, at least with me, is like, it's hard to describe. I mean, it's just like his own style. There's definitely a lot of Reno going into it.
Yeah.
And I think he's had a lot of influence from ragtime as well.
Ragtime is something that I hear in his playing, yeah.
Yeah. So I met Ben. He gave me his old banjo. I kind of watched him a bit, and then I was like, what do you do? He recommended a book, and I got the book. I was living in Maine at the time, and I just practiced, and I got this upgraded to this good time banjo, which I still play it a lot, and I love it.
It has a lot of miles on it. It looks like
it sure does. It's got a lot of it's been to a lot of countries, and it's got a lot of good tone built into it. Although good times are somewhat limited in their tone, but it's versatile. I play clawhammer, I play bluegrass on it, and I did a lot of listening. I still do a lot of listening, but in those early years I was soaking it all in. Scruggs, of course, and Don Reno, and just it's like these guys are so different from each other. How do I do any does it have to be one or the other? Or am I going to never be good at anything if I try to do everything?
Right.
Because I really fell in love with Don Reno's playing, but Scruggs, of course, is there too,
and we should probably at least frame all of this by saying that banjo is not even actually your primary instrument. You're mostly a fiddler. So when you say that you were playing with Ben and he turned you onto the banjo, that I assume that's what you were doing with him, right? You were fiddling, along with his banjoing, and that's still mostly what you perform with. Is the fiddle.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah, I am. I think I'm mostly known as a fiddler. I mean, if you go to my website, the pictures of me with a fiddle.
Right.
But there's also pictures of me with a banjo. But yeah, I'm definitely a fiddler. That's I win my prizes playing fiddle. I've won some banjo contests, but yeah, mainly people call me to play the fiddle.
Yeah.
And I love playing the fiddle. What I have said is that the fiddle is my wife and the banjo is my mistress.
Ooh.
Because I kind of have to
Salacious.
sneak around with the banjo. Like my public persona is fiddle player, but
It's the banjo tabloids.
my true passion is the like what I think about all the time is like playing the banjo. I'm just always thinking about it.
Well, you're in good company with the audience here.
It's
I think we all probably suffer that
such
affliction.
a wonderful sickness.
Cool.
I was just about to play, I guess, this Pete Seeger arrangement of Cindy, which, Pete Seeger is famous for his activism and his folk singing and his a lot of great things that he's done. People often overlook what an amazing banjo player he was. He had his own style, and he did amazing things with it that I tried to copy once. So this is one of those.
Yeah, so that's quite a mix of non-pick finger style on the steel string banjo going into some claw hammer.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about like, okay, this is so counterintuitive, but then pretty much anything you do with a banjo is counterintuitive at first, and then it just feels really natural. So I was thinking like comparing early finger style to bluegrass. It's like, well, bluegrass, once you get into it, it's like, oh, it's just easy. Like you just forward roll, baby. Just, there you go. It's all good. And then classic banjo is like, ooh, this is a lot more complicated. But then when you get used to that, it's like, oh, this isn't too bad either. It's like you get the hang of it.
Yeah, learn some tricks and patterns maybe.
Yeah.
So how did you learn after that? Were you always moonlighting with the banjo, or was there a period where that was your primary thing? And what did you do to keep learning?
I played, I don't know, when I actually I can't remember when I first was allowed to play the banjo on a stage. I was definitely working away at it in secret for a long time.
Yeah. It's hard to be secret with the banjo, though, isn't it?
When I moved to Berlin, I think that's when I got a lot more, I got known as a banjo player over there because I showed up. First time I went there, I didn't have a banjo with me, and everyone was so excited that I played the fiddle. They were like, we need you in our band. Can you teach me lessons? And I was like, okay, great. I'll be back in 6 months, and I'll be the fiddle player. I'll stick around. I'll do this because I was moving there, and that was 2009. I moved there early 2010, but I was hanging out there in 2009. And I got there, in between the time I had been there and when I got back, another fiddle player or two had swooped in, and I was like, hey, I'm here to play the fiddle. And
Kind
they're
of
like,
stole your thunder. Yeah.
We already have a fiddle player, but do you know anyone who plays the banjo? I said, oh, I'll play the banjo. And we were doing mostly like early jazz. People were doing like, hot club kind of stuff. And
so
then
plectrum?
also Dixieland. Yeah, so plectrum,
Okay.
but I didn't want to play plectrum. I played 5-string. And so I could like demonstrate a little bit of that. Like I just learned how to do this from doing it. I was just thrown into it. I was playing on the street a lot. We played a lot of hours every day.
Just busking?
Yeah, just busking. playing on the street, playing in bars and cafes and whatever. And I used a metal thumb pick. Nowadays I mostly use a plastic one, but I don't know, like what's one that I loved playing, the Chic. And, you know, sometimes we'd be in G, but a lot of the time we're in B flat or F or A flat or E flat. So I just, you know.
Like horn keys?
Yeah, I just learned to cope with that. And, you know, with the open tuning, with that tuning, it's like, it's not that complicated. You play chord shapes, there's like 3 inversions per chord.
Right.
Unless it's diminished or augmented, in which case there's
one
inversions.
shape.
Yeah. So it's pretty straightforward. And you've got basically 3 strings to worry about because the Ds are doubled, and you're usually playing the same. Anyway, just saying, I did it the easiest, stupidest possible way, and it worked fine.
Yeah.
So I really enjoy doing that. But like, you know, the Chic, for example, or maybe Sweet Sue, that was always fun. Like, Sweet Sue, just you and the moon of fire knows the reason why. Sweet Sue, yeah, baby, that's you. Now no one else, it seems, ever shares my dream. I just do what I do in this heart of mine. You'll live all the time, Sweet Sue. So mostly I'd just be like the rhythm guy. Occasionally I'd do a solo, and occasionally if it was in G, I would throw in a little bit of blue. You know,
Yeah,
just to drive the jazzers crazy.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah. Oh, man, I played with this one guy a lot who definitely wasn't, like, friend material, but he was working, and he wanted me to play with him, and I was like, this is work. I'm doing it. And he was from Boston.
Okay.
And he hated anything
This is
Southern.
still in Germany, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
He's an American. And I'm not going to say, like, everything about him was bad. He's a bad guy. Working with him was solid. He was, you know, he's had the work ethic. It's like, showed up on time. We worked. We made money. I said, see you later. Yeah, he had I remember one time I played, you know, we just had a lull on the street, and I played Dear Old Dixie.
Okay.
Which everyone knows. Great tune. And so everyone's, you know, in the band, they're playing along because it's easy enough to follow. And afterwards he says, what was that? That was great. And I said, well, it's called Dear Old Dixie. And he says, so I don't like it anymore.
What, just because it had a hillbilly name?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I guess so.
What does he expect?
It's a banjo.
There's like 6 different tunes named Dixie something or other.
Yeah. So yeah, that was a phase in Berlin. I did a lot of that kind of music. I learned a lot of tunes, and that really kind of helped out my fiddling too, because that enabled me to just jump in and play any of those tunes on the fiddle because I'd already learned them.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and then also in Berlin, I played. I started playing solo shows because there wasn't anyone to play old time music with, and at the time. So I was doing clawhammer with my good time, and that was really cool. I'm doing more solo stuff these days, so I'm incorporating newer things that are part of my musical life. But another cool thing that I did in Berlin was to get into playing Turkish music.
Ooh,
which they wanted
very
me to,
interesting.
They wanted me to play the banjo because there was already a fiddle player in the band, and when I recorded with this group, I used my good time because I didn't have this banjo yet, but now I just put down the good time and picked up this one.
Yeah, describe the instrument that you have here for us. Okay,
so I was playing Turkish music, and even before I got into that, I had always thought, wouldn't it be cool to play a banjo without frets? Because I'm a fiddler, I'm used to fretless, you know, I think it's really fun to slide and have that kind of flexibility of where the notes sound in terms of pitch. And at one point I was at Clifftop and someone handed me a fretless banjo and I was like, what? You mean this is a thing? Because I just dreamed about it. And well, yeah, of course, like the original banjo was fretless. Like they didn't put frets on them until sometime in the 19th century, but they were around for years before that. Yeah. So I wanted to play this Turkish music, which has notes that are between the notes. You know, it's not a Western diatonic scale. They've got other notes that are between, the, you know, quarter tones,
the
and
white
whatnot.
Key and the black key.
Exactly.
There's a third key in between there, right?
It's such cool music. I mean, it's so, I don't know. Anyway,
and this instrument, then it's actually in some ways by far the most bluegrass instrument that you have. It's got a resonator and like a master tone style pot. But then the neck is completely berserk.
Yeah.
And,
so the neck is, so this is like a master tone copy that a friend of mine built from a Stu Mack collection of parts from Stu Mack. And he was kind of a designer, producer kind of person. Charlie Hardy is his name. He's in London. Mm-hmm. I don't think he's making lots of banjos, but anyway, cool guy. Hey, Charlie, if you're listening. He said, well, what do you want the fingerboard to look like? And I said, well, I think it should be Formica. And he said, okay, here's a catalog of Formica patterns. There's 1,000 patterns in there. Pick out the one you want. And I just couldn't, because there was like zebra stripe.
Just
there was
overwhelming.
There was like fake wood styles, which I thought would be hilarious.
Okay.
There was like metallic, holographic, you know, options. There was like so many. You could get paisley, you could get polka dots, you know,
just anything.
Anything. It was too much. I had options paralysis. And he said, well, how about, since I'm making the thing, you just let me decide. And so he made it just a solid color, and it's like teal, I guess is the name of this color. And I love it. It's, you know, and
it matches your van, by the way. People will just have to take our word for that.
Right.
But he has a matching van. Yeah.
Coincidence, because I didn't paint it that color, and when the person who painted it that color did paint it, they didn't know that I had this banjo.
Yeah,
they hadn't
strange.
seen this banjo. But I think it looks cool. It doesn't look like a traditional banjo, of course.
And like you said, fretless. So it's just this bright teal fretless neck.
The tuners are ebony, so it's got this nice, you know, it's a little bit subdued except for the whole fingerboard, which takes up most of the visual space. And he actually he got the headstock to have that Formica on it as well, which isn't, it's cosmetic, but it's, you know, it looks really cool.
Yeah.
So
what did you use that for? Turkish music?
So I play Turkish music, you know, like, when you want to play in between the notes, oh, there's a pus there. That's what's a good example of that? I don't know. There's like. Okay, I haven't done this in a long time. So yeah, I got this. My friend made this banjo for me because I wanted a fretless bluegrass banjo to play with this band, because it was a big band. There was clarinet and trumpet and violin and two percussionists playing loud drums, and it was so much fun. But I also used it for, you know, some of my solo stuff. I'd play some clawhammer, some finger picking stuff, and I know I did some recording on it, like some recording with it where You can play really nice, quiet stuff with it, like really subtle, like. You get this vibrato on it,
Right, very wide.
And if you really go for it, you don't even need to pick the string. You can just. Anyways, and yeah, I mean, I enjoyed playing Swedish waltzes on it too.
Yeah. Well, you're definitely not one to take the road most traveled. I think that's becoming obvious to all of us. Hearing Swedish fretless waltzes and Turkish music and ragtime melodies. You never actually told us what the banjo was that you played the classic piece on.
Yeah, so I got this banjo 2 years ago when I attended the banjo gathering for the first time at the suggestion of my pal Greg Adams. I actually want to give some shout outs to all the people who helped me discover and get excited about classic banjo.
Right.
My first exposure to it was through Curly Miller and Carol Ann Rose, who had a band called the Old 78s, and you can find their stuff on the internet. And they were influenced by Clark Bueling, who's still around, still performing. Sure. He's in Arkansas, and that's where Curly and Carol Ann were. /R. Curly died a few years ago, but his memory lives on very strongly with at least a lot of us. I remember I was at Clifftop. I was there with my old band with Ben, and I think we were there to try and win the band contest, which we did. I'm very proud of that. And Carol Ann came over and she said, "I heard you guys play the Russian rag," and we said, "Yeah, we do." She said, "Well, come with me right away." So she took us over to their campsite, and she said, "Curly, these guys play the Russian rag."
And did you know who these people were at the time?
No,
okay.
I didn't know them. I didn't know who they were, but they were friendly. They were cool, right. And the Russian rag is not a lot of people play that. I
don't think I've heard it, but
it's a ragtime piece from, I think it was written 1916, but Dave Apollon made it famous. I think he had a great version of it that was recorded in the 20s. So she said, "Well, let's all play the Russian rag." So we said, "Great, yeah." So we played the Russian rag, and Curly played it early fingerstyle, classic style.
Yeah.
And Ben played it his own style that he had come up with this awesome arrangement. If you look for Russian rag of, me and Ben playing it on YouTube, there's a lot of versions of him. It's amazing what he does with it.
Okay.
So, I just
but he was playing it more or less like bluegrass adaptation style, right?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, like with finger picks and maybe not doing lots of rolls, but like he's playing the melody.
Yeah.
So I was like, Curly, it's great to meet you, and not to be disrespectful or anything. Like, that sounds cool, but like, why not use a resonator banjo with steel strings and finger picks? It would be louder. You could play faster. And that's when he started telling me about the history of this and like why he does it that way. And it really was interesting. And it took me a few years from that point to actually get interested enough to try it myself. And what kind of turned the tide for me, well, there's two things. One was getting asked to, so when Curly passed away, they had been in the middle of a recording project, and Carol Ann asked me to take his place and kind of finish the...
Oh, wow.
Because Curly was also a banjo player and fiddle player. So they wanted me to play the fiddle parts, and Greg Adams was going to play the banjo stuff.
Oh, how cool.
And that's how I got to know Greg better, but I also met Greg at Clifftop. Greg is super friendly and encouraging and supportive and big influence on me in the banjo playing, and
not
in
to
general.
mention just a huge well of knowledge
Yeah.
about all these things.
Oh, he's a monster. It's amazing. So we were all doing that project together, and we were doing some of these really cool classic banjo pieces, and I was playing them on the fiddle. And I was like, are these really meant to be played on the fiddle? And they said, well, maybe, maybe not, but it's what we were going to do. You know, Curly was going to do it. And so, you know, and I was like, great. So we did it. We had a great time. The record, it's not been released yet, but it's really, really close to being.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, keep your eyes out for it. I think it'll be under the name The Old 78s. I think it's going to be called The Final Frontier. So after that experience of seeing Greg play those pieces up close, I was like, okay, I'm interested. I feel like I should learn how to play this stuff on the banjo and not just play the melodies on the fiddle. Greg gave me this folder. That top folder there is full of sheet music that he gave me. He's like, these are all duplicates that I don't need. You can take this and learn the melodies and play them on the fiddle, and the next time we see each other, we can jam. And so I started looking at him, and I got out my banjo, and I was like, you know, this is really cool. This is made for the banjo. Like, this stuff, you know how there's things that on the banjo just roll out and they kind of make sense, and it's like intuitive, and it feels good. On the fiddle, it's the opposite. Like something like an arpeggio, like playing a roll, like, you know, like a standard, you know, something like that. Is
it's kind of silly.
It sucks on the fiddle.
Yeah.
And then vice
and
versa.
Vice versa, of course,
there's a lot of stuff that's easy on the fiddle, like a straightforward melodic scale. On the banjo is like, ouch, why is this so weird? So these pieces were written for the banjo, like you asked earlier. Were they written specifically for the banjo? And yeah, a lot of them were. So that's kind of what gave me the motivation. And I went to the banjo gathering 2 years ago, and Kevin Enoch had this banjo, and it's a senorita that was a 5-string senorita with a little resonator on it, and it's got kind of like a slightly deeper pot than you would usually see on a bluegrass banjo.
Yeah, it's made by Bacon and Day, right?
Yeah, it's Bacon and Day model. This was manufactured by Gretsch. But the senoritas were a really popular model. They were around for a few decades, from the 30s to the 50s, and they went through a few different manufacturers.
Now, would this be kind of a common type of instrument to see for a classic banjoist? Is there an accepted, like, Gibson master tone of the classic banjo world?
I think Stewart banjos are really common.
Okay.
Fairbanks and Cole are also really. Bacon banjos are also really common, and this is just one of many. And it's not the highest end either. It's not like a super valuable instrument, although it turns out it is somewhat rare, because by the 50s, most of the banjos that were being made under this model name were 4-string banjos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they can get pretty ornate as well.
Yeah, especially those tenor banjos too. They get. I mean, those are more like to look at than to play.
Jewels on them and stuff.
Yeah,
that's funny. What would you recommend people do if they want to start getting into this stuff? I imagine it could be pretty intimidating. You kind of said more or less how you learned is that Greg Adams gave you this pile of sheet music, but you had the good fortune of being brought up with the violin and you knew how to read music. Is that an essential aspect of this? Like, if someone wants to get into classic banjo, is that just something they're going to have to face? Is you're going to have to read music?
I think sooner or later you're going to have to learn to read music.
Okay. And we're talking staff notation. We're not talking tablature.
Right.
Is there classic banjo tablature out there?
I think there is some out there, but it'll only take you so far.
Right.
Partly because not everything's in tab, and partly because tab it's kind of like a halfway point. It doesn't actually convey as much information as you need. Right. So I don't want to discourage anyone from using tab, but just understand it's a temporary thing. It's not going to get you as far as you want to go.
So what resources are there? Are there
There's this book that I think is really great, and I use it for people that I teach. You could just contact me because I teach Skype lessons.
Yeah, well, there you go.
But no, there's a few resources I'll mention. The one is this book. I love this book. It's called 5-String Banjo Method by Frank Bradbury, and it's available from Mel Bay. It's like you can probably find a used copy online for $20. there's a website that was really helpful for me, and I think for anyone it would be really helpful. It's called it's classic-banjo.ning.com.
What is that? Is that a country code?
Ning is it's like GeoCities or something. It's like an old school web domain kind of
very
thing.
Strange.
Yeah, so that part's weird. But if you go and look at the thing, it's like such a great resource.
Leave it to classic banjoists to have this very bizarre website.
Yeah. I can't sing its praises enough. There's all kinds of resources from like, what is classic banjo, ? To player biographies and composer biographies, to like thousands of free downloads of sheet music.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
So, yeah, I mean, anytime I'm like, I wonder if there's any pieces out there with the word lobster in the title. Right. You can just type that in the search box.
Something will come up.
But, I listened to your episode with Davy Jones, and Sunflower Dance is kind of the gold standard for a beginner piece.
Oh, that's good to know.
It's a great place to start because it's achievable, but it's also not boringly easy.
Yeah, it's got a nice melody still.
Yeah. And then, YouTube, you can search classic banjo. There's a lot of people are just modern hobbyists putting up videos of themselves.
Who are the
including myself.
Right, yeah, you have plenty up there, and it always sounds really cool. I like it when I see a new video from your channel there. So who are like the Earl Scruggs and Ralph Stanley and J.D. Crowe of the classic banjo world? What's the Mount Rushmore that you need to know?
Okay, Fred Van Epps.
Okay.
He was, some people will say he was not the best banjo player that ever lived, but he was an incredible technician. He could just do anything on the instrument.
Okay.
I've heard people critique his musicianship, and I'm like, the guy can play fast. He's playing fast. It's okay. He wants to play fast. Let him play fast. Yeah. But it's intimidating for sure, but it is completely marvelous. And he was also kind of the youngest of that generation of players who achieved that level of virtuosity. So he was recorded more than anyone else. He was recording since the late 19th century up until 1952 or 4, I think was his last recording. And he just got better and better with age. So Fred Van Epps is, he's just like kind of unbeatable.
Definitely one of the guys.
But Wes Osman also needs to be mentioned because, he was pretty much just as good as Fred Van Epps, just was older and didn't live as long, so didn't record as much.
Sure.
I even heard a recording of Fred Bacon, who, these banjos are named
Bacon
after.
And Day.
Okay. And it was mind-blowing.
Wow.
It was like, oh my God. And it's so inspiring and intimidating because you hear this stuff and you're like, these guys couldn't have actually been that good. Nobody can do that on a banjo. That's not possible.
Right.
And then, you come around to it and it's like, you know what? They just didn't do anything else. They didn't check their email. They didn't go driving for 8 hours to get to a gig. They just practiced all the time.
Yeah, and certain things happen when you practice all the time, one of which is you get really good at whatever it is that you're practicing.
Oh my God.
That's great.
Like head exploding levels of just, anyone
cool,
who plays the banjo should hear this stuff. I'm not saying you need to try and play it. I totally encourage you to try and play it because it's really fun. And even if you only get a couple bars of it, it's like, man, I just did a crazy thing.
Yeah,
so,
it seems like the perfect thing, even if you're not going to jump into it with all your might. It might be one of those really cool things where if you're at a plateau in your playing and you don't really know what to work on and what should I do, maybe trying to look into a few of these things or at least listen to it and try to get a different sound in your head to inspire your playing. Always a good idea.
I was going to say something like bluegrass is like checkers and this kind of music is like chess. But to be fair, I'd say more like clawhammer is like checkers, bluegrass is like backgammon.
Okay.
and this stuff is like chess.
Right.
It's just it's intricate and there's a lot of space for musical expression. There's like, it's not all fast. Like, well, I'll play a little bit of the intro for the Banshee, which is like one of the first pieces I learned because I got it from Greg Adams.
Yeah, cool.
This is just a beautiful piece. And keep in mind, this is coming from before bluegrass and also before jazz. So this kind of music is, I thought that this was like the banjo version of ragtime, because ragtime I thought was piano music. But actually this predates ragtime and kind of informed the approach to ragtime. So this is a big part of American and British music history, and it often gets overlooked. It was really, really popular in its time.
What's it called again?
So this piece, this is called The Banshee.
Yeah, okay.
It's by Emil Grimshaw, who's another one of my favorite composers. He's from England, and he actually was a guitar maker. I was also going to mention something about the Bacon banjo thing, because the way it worked in those days was there's kind of a ceiling to how successful you could become as a performer. It's like, okay, you're a famous performer. You can only play so many dates a year. You can't sell records. You can't get played on the radio and get royalties. You know, you're not going to play stadiums or anything because there wasn't any of that available at the time. There wasn't any recording technology. So the next thing you would do is make a tutor book, a teaching book,
right?
Educational stuff. And then if that went really well and you were like, okay, I can't keep making books, I've already made 10 of them, then you start making instruments. And that's how Bacon banjos got started. That's how a bunch of these instrument companies got started, was because, Fred Van Epps was making banjos too, because it was the same thing. It's like, well, I'm recording and I'm writing books, but like, what else can I do?
Yeah, I need a little more.
If I have a banjo with my name on it, someone's going to buy it. Yeah, okay, I'll play a little bit of the Banshee for you.
Very cool.
And then it goes into the fast part, which is awesome too. Very contrasting. So yeah, there's like, I don't know. Another thing I love about this music is that it comes from a time before forms got really set, before like patterns of chord progressions and things. Not to say that bluegrass or old time is like super standard. Like, of course there's standard chord progressions, but then there's always a song here or there that's like, well, that's different. This stuff, a lot of it's really different.
It's just almost random seeming.
Yeah, you face some really interesting variety, and it's like people are trying stuff out. You know, the composers of the time, they had this great ambition to create the great American music as a sort of a response to Western classical music, and there was a lot of hope around that, a lot of pride. And also the British guys too, they were writing music, and it's like we're doing something new. And it was contemporary with people like Debussy and Rachmaninoff. It's like those who we think of as classical composers now, they were contemporary at that time.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, they were all palling around.
Yeah.
Very cool. Hey, tell everyone how to find you and your music online if they want to look into this stuff, or maybe, like you said, get some lessons from you to get started.
Oh, yeah. honestly, the most of this stuff that I have out there is on my Instagram, which is just my name, Aaron Jonah Lewis. Or no, there's an @ sign before it, I guess. I've got lots of little 1 minute or less clips on there, and they're all pretty informal, just whenever I feel like it, I can pull out the phone when I'm working on something. I have a website, which is myname.com, aaronjonahlewis.com. That's got my contact on there. You can send me a message through that. You can also send me a message on Instagram or on Facebook. I've got a Facebook page. It's, you guessed it, Aaron Jonah Lewis. So, yeah, I think that about covers it. My website doesn't have videos on it, so it does have a lot of stuff you can listen to. Like, I'm trying to make a record this year. I'm trying to figure out, because I'm not really doing it solo, because I need people to play with me, but it's going to be kind of a solo record, and I'm trying to focus on the classic banjo stuff. But, got to figure out the rest of the puzzle pieces, and
Sure.
when that's ready, I'm going to tell everyone about it, especially if they're following me on, social media.
Social stuff, yeah.
I also send out emails about every month or two with stories from my life and my touring and where I'm playing and stuff like that. So if you want to be on my mailing list, send me a message with your email address, and I'll add you to my list. And if you want to read sample messages or just read whatever I've got without signing up, that's on my website too. If you go to the website and click on the news tab, that's all that is.
Excellent. Well, hey, you've given us a ton to think about. I'm definitely not very familiar with any of these types of music that you've been going over, so it's been very educational, and I appreciate you meeting up with me and getting to talk about all this.
Absolutely. I'm so happy we could do this. Yeah. If I could have any one thing to come away with, it wouldn't be to play this or don't play that. It would just be stay open to whatever's going on around you and hang out with whoever's playing music, whether it's something you know about or not. There's something to learn there, and you don't have to do what you think you're supposed to do. You can just do anything.
Do what you want and what you think sounds good.
Try it out. See how it goes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, hey, thanks again, man.
Yeah, thanks to you, Keith. I love the podcast.
Thanks. And that's going to wrap up today's episode of the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. Special thanks to our Patreon sponsor of this episode, Wayne Bartlett. If you enjoy the podcast and would like to become a sponsor yourself, go to patreon.com/banjopodcast. Email the show at pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com. And that's all I have to say for now. I'll see you all next time.